When I bought the Nintendo Switch 2, I decided to give my original Nintendo Switch to my kids to use on our living room TV. However, one of the downsides is I only have, for the most part, wired controllers with one little micro wireless controller that's perfect for my daughter, but I didn't want to have all these different wired controllers tugging at the Switch 2 or knocking anything over. So I started looking at getting a wireless controller so both of my kids could play on the big screen without this being a hassle. And I started looking at a bunch of different options. I looked at the official Nintendo Pro controller, but to be completely honest with you, for what my kids are going to use this for, I couldn't justify spending, $60, $70 on that type of controller for them. So I started looking at some of the alternatives, and I found on Amazon you could find a lot of, for all intents and purposes, some will call them knockoffs. I'm going to call it a replica to be respectful, but essentially replicas of the Pro controller for a substantially cheaper price point. So I looked at a brand called SZHSK, and they created this Pro controller here that looks pretty one-to-one with the Nintendo Switch or the official Nintendo Switch controller. And I only spent about $20 on this. And in this video, I'm going to go over what I like about this controller and if ultimately this price point is too good to be true. So let's take a look. So to start, when I was shopping for this controller, I was actually partially buying this as a birthday gift for my son. He wanted Splatoon 3, so I saw that this same brand had offered a Splatoon 3 style controller, which from what I could tell was a complete replica of the official Nintendo one that they released on the release of that game. The downside though is when I received this controller, I did not get a Splatoon 3 or Splatoon based theme. I ended up getting a dragon skin on this controller. Not a major issue, and it's not like my son noticed, but it did leave a little bit of a bad taste in our mouths, or my mouth anyways, when I saw that it wasn't exactly what I thought I was ordering for him. Now, out of the box, there really isn't much to this. It advertises on the box that this comes with a charging cord. My box was completely missing it. I'm assuming this was lost when they were packaging it or something. I'm not sure. Regardless, connecting a controller like this is super easy. You just plug it in with a USB-C cord and press the buttons that the Switch asks you to, and it pretty much recognizes it immediately. Now, the biggest thing for me when it comes to any third-party controller is how the joysticks feel. I've been pretty critical on almost every single controller review that any of you may have watched on this channel about the dead zones and the way the joysticks feel. And out of the box, I'm gonna put it like this. You definitely get what you pay for. So the joysticks themselves, they're acceptable. If you're playing like a platforming game like Mario, this controller is gonna do absolutely fine. It's gonna be responsive and feel good. But where this story changes is once we start trying shooter style games, and I actually tested this on my Switch 2 as well, and I tested it with Hitman, and I was curious, would this have better aiming than the stock Nintendo Switch joysticks or Joy-Cons? And the answer is these are actually a step back, and I want to highlight something. The Joy-Cons themselves are good and durable, but they're not great for shooters. And that's why when you get like a Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controller, you feel such a smooth difference and they feel so good for aiming. So I was hoping that this would be similar, but what I found was the dead zones are completely off with these joysticks. They don't feel like they have the nuanced movement that you'd expect out of a good quality controller. And so trying to play a shooter or a shooting game like a Hitman, for example, felt really bad. It didn't feel like it would work well. And so I, after a certain amount of time, just got frustrated and went back to my Switch 2 Pro controller. Now, again, of course, the obvious thing here is I'm comparing this to a $120 taxes in controller versus a $20 controller. So that's absolutely going to be the case with something like this, right? We're not going to get that same quality, but it's just something to highlight because Some people may look at this as, you know, why would I pay $100 when I get the $20 version for the exact same thing? But this isn't the same thing. Now, moving forward is looking at the actual buttons. Now, I've used the original Pro controller on the Switch. Obviously, I have the Switch 2 Pro controller, and the buttons have a nice softness to them, is the best way to put it. They feel durable and rugged, but also have a nice softness when you press them, which just indicates that they're well built ultimately. This controller is not the case. The buttons feel kind of hard. They feel hard to the touch. When you press them in, it feels very, I don't want to say mechanical, but very stiff. So that is something to highlight as well. If you're someone who's looking at this as a controller you're going to use for a fighting game, you may not find this as comfortable as the standard Nintendo Switch Pro controller, but it is acceptable. I never had any issues where it never read my button presses or never registered them or felt like there was any sort of delay. That all felt fine. It's just, as far as they actually feel, it's not great. Now, going further into this, you do have the gyroscope capabilities, which for almost every third-party Switch device I've used, the gyroscope seems to always work very well. I tried this only briefly with Splatoon 3 and it seemed to work just fine. So if that's a way that you like to play your games, you're not going to really have any concessions there versus your Joy-Cons or official Switch controllers, so that works well. Now, as far as battery life goes, I've tested this on my living room Switch, is what we'll refer to my Switch 1 as, and my main Switch 2, and the battery, I charged it in full once, and it seems to barely be going down. If there's one thing I can highlight about this controller, after the 15 hours or so use between myself and my son, it barely seems like the battery has taken much of an impact. So as far as battery life goes, the performance of this feels very close to the regular Switch Pro controller, which is a great thing. So really, the ultimate purpose of this video, in my opinion, is who is this type of device for? And my answer would be this. If you want a secondary controller for the once in a blue moon, you're gonna have someone over to play, you know, a two-player Mario or a Smash Brothers or Mario Kart, this is the perfect controller, in my opinion, well worth the $20 that you'd spend on something like this. But if this is going to be your main controller when you're sitting and using your Switch or Switch 2 in docked mode, and you're going to be using this as your main way to play, you're going to find this is very lackluster, especially for shooters. You're going to find that this controller doesn't work that well, unless you're someone who's a diehard for gyroscope aiming, which isn't personally my thing. But for the $20 price point, I think there's a lot to like here. But comparing it to the official Nintendo controller or some of the other third-party controllers that I've reviewed for the Switch, there's a lot to be desired here. But again, the ultimate thematic of this review is you get what you pay for. And so if you want a knockoff or a imitation Pro controller, this looks very close. The housing looks very close. It looks like they use very similar molding to build this. And it even feels in the hands, has a nice weighting to it. It doesn't feel bad. It's just the buttons aren't great and the joysticks, especially for aiming, are not great. So take that for what it is. For 20 bucks, if you want this as a secondary controller or something that you want to give to your kids that you don't want to worry about damaging a $100+ controller, then this might fit your needs.